Hey, grade 10s. I'm just going to be going over the review. I will post this week so that you guys can get the answers on certain things, and then just give you a little bit more detail for your test next week. Okay, so if we're looking to the review assignment and we just go through here and do some matching. So the first term is trigonometry, okay? So trigonometry, we do know, is the branch of mathematics that deals with the measurement of angles in triangles, okay? So that would be D. The opposite side we know is the one across from the angle under examination, and in this case would be A. And then we know that the adjacent side is the one next to the angle under investigation, and we know that it's not the hypotenuse. Now we know the hypotenuse, on the other hand, is the one opposite from the right angle, and in this case, that would be B. Okay. So once again, trigonometry being the branch of mathematics that deals with the measure of angles. The opposite side being the one across from the angle under examination, the adjacent side being the one right beside it, and then finally the one across from the right angle or 90-degree angle would be our hypotenuse. Okay, so for our final, our instructions for this part of the review is that we show all our work to guarantee full marks. We make sure that our sine, cosine, and tangent answers are to 4 decimal places. Our length of our answers are 1 decimal place for length, and then our angle to the nearest degrees, and not to forget the angles of measure. So for this, it says find the following value, round off to 4 answers. So if I had my calculator, I'd type in either 40 tan or tan 40, whichever works for you. For me, it's 40 tan, and in this case, it would be 0.839, and then it's 0.99, so I'd round it to 1. My next one is sine 75. So again, 75 sine on my calculator being 0.9659. Okay, so in this case, again, we are rounding to our last decimal place, and what is after the 9 is a 2, so we round to that answer there. Next, 25 cos ends up being 0.90630, so we just stick at 3. 86 sine would be 0.99756, so we'd round it to 6. 49 cos on my calculator would be 0.6560. And then finally, on my calculator, 11 tan is going to give me the answer of 0.19438 or 4. Okay, so again, type in number, then tan, or tan the number, depending on your calculator, but these are what you should get if you go through that. Okay, so all of these I've rounded to 4 decimal places, and that should be our answers. Now, find the value of each of the following angles. So we know when we use angles, we use the -1 signs, okay? So those are important, and our job is to round to the nearest degree. When we do this, we're going to need to go to the second function button on our calculator, and that's going to help us with what we need to do. So if I do that, and I go 0.9865 second function of sine, which will get me to sine -1 by bringing this over, sine -1. Okay, my answer would then be 80 degrees. Okay, if I did the same thing over here and it became cos -1, I would type in 0.3920 second function cos -1, 66.9 if I rounded, 67 degrees. And then finally, tan C, we know we have to do the -1 again. So it'd be 0.175 second function tan -1. And I got 9.92 or 10 degrees. Once again, when we find the angles, we use these right here, okay? And it's important that we do that. All right, so 80, 67, and 10. All right, it says calculate the measure of the unknown angle using the tangent formula. So we know if we're going to do our test, right at the top of the test, I want you to write SO, CA, and TOA, and that will help us with all our measurements. So in this case, we have tan because it tells us tan. But if we didn't have that, we see this is the angle we have, and we have the, if we label our sides, hypotenuse, this would be opposite, and this would be adjacent. I don't have the hypotenuse, but I have the opposite and adjacent. And if I went up around here, I'd need to see both O and A in the thing. O and H, nope. A and H, nope. O and A, yes. So I would use tan. So tan X is equal to opposite over adjacent. So 18 over 8. Tan X would be then equal to, if I divided those two numbers there, I would get 2.25. And remember, whenever we're dealing with the angle, we're going to use the tan -1. So I take 2.25 and I multiply it by tan -1, and I'm going to get X is equal to 66 degrees because I round to the nearest degree for every angle measurement. Okay. It says calculate the unknown angle using the sine formula. So we know, once again, it gives us this, but if we have our hypotenuse, and in this case we have our opposite, we know that SO follows that equation. So sine X is equal to opposite over hypotenuse, and in that case, 8.5 divided by 15. So sine X is then equal to this number divided by that number. And that would be 0.5667, or sorry, 0.567. And then we know, since we're finding the angle, we need to use the sine -1. And then if we do that, X would then be equal to 34.6, or in this case, 35 degrees. Okay. Now, once again, it asks us to calculate an unknown angle using the cosine. So CA, or adjacent over hypotenuse. We know we have the hypotenuse. We know we have the adjacent. In this case, we're dealing with X, and it would be cos X is equal to the adjacent, so 11.4 over the hypotenuse, which is 16.5. Once we do 11.4 divided by 16.5, we should come up with the answer of 0.6909. And once again, finding the angle, cos -1, and we would come up with the answer of second function cos, or cos -1, would be 46 degrees. Okay. So once again, those three examples there, if we have the angle, we know at some point we're going to have to use the tan -1. Okay. For the following, it says calculate the length of the unknown side using the tangent formula. So we know tangent, once again, is TOA. So tan theta is equal to opposite over adjacent. Okay. And that's just out there for us. If we use this first one, we see that we have an angle, and this would be our opposite. This would be our adjacent, and then that long one obviously being our hypotenuse, but we don't need to use it in this example. So in this case, we could just fill in the following. So tan 68, because that's the angle, equals opposite, which is x, over adjacent, which is 8. So once again, if it's divided by, so it's x divided by 8, if I want to get rid of that and keep x by itself, I have to do the opposite operation of division, and that would be multiplication. So it would be tan 68 times 8 would be equal to x, okay? And if I was to do, on my calculator, it's 68 tan, would give me 2.4751 times 8 equals x. And if I did that on my calculator, I'm rounding to the nearest tenth, and in this case, it would be 19.8, and they're using centimeters, okay? Centimeters. The next one, we know we're also using tangent formula. So this is the side right here. We know this is hypotenuse. It's the long one. This is our angle. So the one across from it is our opposite, and the one beside it being our adjacent. So if we set up our formula, tan theta equals opposite over adjacent, we can fill in what we know. So tan and that angle is 75. The opposite is 20. And the adjacent in this case is x. So once again, we need to get x by itself, but we don't want it on the bottom of the equation or divided by. So to move it across, we need to multiply x by tan 75, and that will give us 20. Now, we want x completely by itself, so the only way we can do that is getting tan 75 away from x and bring it over to the other side. Now, when we bring it over to the other side, we have to do the opposite operation. So bracket beside bracket is multiplication. So when we bring it over to the other side, it becomes division. So it'd be tan 75, or 20 divided by tan 75. So then if we reset that right here, it would be x equals 20 divided by 75 tan on my calculator is 3.7320. And if I was to divide 20 divided by 3.7320, I would get the answer of x equals 5.4 centimeters. Okay, it was 5.359, so we would round to 3.6, and if we go to the top, it would be 5.4. Okay, so that, once again, we've used tangent formula two different ways. So with the x on top, we need to remember that it's only one step of cross multiplication, and then on the bottom one, since it's on the bottom, we have to do two steps of that. Okay. So if we look at this here, we're doing the exact same thing, but with sine. So what we're doing. So sine theta equals opposite over hypotenuse. And we know that the hypotenuse is right there. The side across from the angle is our opposite. So we've got that, and that's x, and we have our angle. So if we just fill in the points, we have got sine 25 equals opposite we don't have, so x is there, and 12 is on the bottom. This one is slightly easier because the x is on top. We only have to make one move. So the 12 is being divided by, so if we want to bring it to the other side, it has to be multiplied by sine 25 equals x. And in this case, if I just multiply those two things, 25 sine on my calculator is 0.4226 and multiplied by 12. I'm going to come up with a side length of 5.1 centimeters. Okay. If If I do it on the other side, it's going to be slightly tougher. I'm just going to fill this in right away. So sine theta equals opposite over adjacent. I know this is my angle, so it'd be 61. This being our opposite, this being our hypotenuse. So we know my opposite is 9 and my hypotenuse is x. We need to bring that x over, so it'd be x times sine 61 equals 9. But once again, we know we need x by itself. And since it's multiplication, when we bring it to the other side, it becomes division. And then in this case, we'd have 9 divided by sine 61, or 61 sine. This case is 0.8746. And if we did that math right there, x would be equal to 10.29, so we round to 1, 10.3 meters. Sorry, not centimeters. That's the unit we use. Okay. So a couple more here. We're going to do the same thing with cosine, and then we've got a couple more answers here we're going to deal with. Okay, so it says using cosine formula. All right, so same thing we've been doing, but we have ka. So cosine angle equals adjacent over hypotenuse. All right. So in this case, we know our angle. The one across is opposite, the big one being hypotenuse, and the one beside, of course, being our adjacent side. So it'd be cos 40 is equal to the adjacent side, which is x, and the opposite, sorry, not the opposite side, the hypotenuse being 15. So in this case, we know if it's division over here, we got to bring it over and it becomes multiplication. So it's 15 times cos 40 equals x. And if I jumped ahead and I did cos 40, so 40 cos, it's 0.7660. And I'm just going to multiply that by 15 right off the hop. And it would then end up being 11.49. And we would make sure we round that to 11.5 centimeters equals x. Okay. Now, the final question where we know it's cos, I'm not going to write the opposite over adjacent, because we know, or hypotenuse, sorry, adjacent over a hypotenuse, my bad. This is the hypotenuse, this is adjacent. We know that the opposite side of that is over here. So it'd be cos 31, and I fill in the adjacent, which would be 6, divided by the hypotenuse, which is x. We know we want x by itself and not at the bottom, so if it's division over here, it must become multiplication. And it will be equal to 6. When we're in this position here, we need to then, since we're multiplying x by cos 31, if it's multiplication on this side of the equal sign, we need to bring it over to the other side, and it becomes division, or the opposite operation. So then we would be left with x equals 6 divided by cos 31. Now, cos 31, if you were to put it on your calculator, once again, you need to figure out the way that works properly for your calculator, whether it's 31 cos or cos 31. For me, it's 31 cos. Would then be x equals 6 divided by 0.8572. And then if we just did that simple division, we would then come up with the answer of 6.99, and we would round that to the nearest tenth, being 7.0 meters. Okay, so we've gone through how to find the unknown side based on our different ratios, being tan, sine, and cosine. And now we're going to have to find out find the measure of x to the nearest degree. So when we know degrees, we're going to have to use tan -1, cos -1, or sine -1. And we're actually going to have to choose the correct trigonomic function. So again, I tell you guys to do this all the time. So TOA, and you're going to need to make a decision based on what you have. Okay, so in this case, we know our angle is x over here. We have, this would be the hypotenuse. This would be the opposite, and the adjacent being right beside x. So I need both O and H, or opposite and hypotenuse, when trying to figure out the degree of this specific angle. So if I look at the side here, opposite and hypotenuse, wow, is the first one I looked at. I'm going to use sine ratio to figure out what I need to do. So sine x equals opposite over hypotenuse, and sine x is equal to the opposite being 3, the hypotenuse being 10. Sine x would then be equal to 0.3. And our job is to get x by itself, and we know when we're finding the angle, we need to bring over the sine, and it becomes sine negative 1. So then x, if we put this into our calculators, 0.3 sine negative 1 would then be 17.4. So our rounding would then just go to 17 degrees. Okay. All right, the next one, if we look at this, we're looking for a side length, it looks like, because it says find x, and in this case, it's this side length right here. So we have an angle, which is awesome, and the side across from it would be opposite. This side, this long one here being hypotenuse, and the one beside the answer being, or the x, or the 20 degrees, is our adjacent. So now we need to look at, there's nothing by the opposite, so we're using hypotenuse and we're using adjacent because we want to find that x. So in this case, we need to have A and H. So O and H, no, we need A and H. Cosine A and H, perfect. So we know we're going to use cosine equals adjacent over hypotenuse. Okay. So in this case here, we have the angle already, right? And that angle being 20. So cos 20 is equal to adjacent, which we don't know, which is x. And we know that hypotenuse is 12. So once again, it's x divided by 12. We want x by itself. So we bring that over, and the opposite operation is multiplication. So it'd be 12 times cos 20 equals x. If I did cos 20 again on my calculator, I would get 12 times 4 decimal places, remember, 0.9397 equals x. And if I was to do x, it would then be equal to 11.27, or in this case 11.3, because we round 10 centimeters. All right. So once again, we picked the right sides based on what we have, and we filled in the trigonomic ratio. All right, last one. We have 41 degrees. We got 12 over here, and we got this long side. So we know the long side is the hypotenuse, and we know that the side across from the angle is the opposite, and the one right beside it being the adjacent. Well, in this case, we have nothing over here, so we need to find the hypotenuse and the opposite. Or we need to use those in this equation. In that case, we'd have to have O and H. So O and H would be in sine. So O and H being in sine. So it would be sine angle, or theta, is equal to opposite over hypotenuse. In this case, we know what the angle is, so it would be sine 41 is equal to opposite being 12, and the hypotenuse being x. So again, it's one of the ones where it's on the bottom, which makes things a little tougher because it's one more step. But in this case, we want x by itself, but we can't have it on the bottom. We need to bring it to the other side, and since it's division on the right side, it must become multiplication on the left. So it'd be x times sine 41 equals 12. Once again, we want this x by itself, and it's multiplying to sine 41. So we want sine 41 to go to the other side. Since it's multiplication, it becomes division because it is the opposite operation. And then we'd have x is equal to 12, and I'm just going to do the step of sine 41. So sine 41 is 0.6560. And if I did 12 divided by 0.6560, I would then get the answer of x is equal to 18.29, or round up to 18.3 centimeters. Okay, so that's your 2.20 or unit 2 review, going through each question. They're going to look a lot like the test, and then the only thing we don't have is word problems, and I will put out another video based on that. Thank you, and hopefully this helps with your studying.